With the support of 36 governors, Congress and former President George W. Bush passed and signed into law the Renewable Fuel Standard in 2005. The RFS was expanded in 2007. In fact, President Bush signed the RFS-2 into law on this very day 6 years ago. The goal of the law was to reduce petroleum imports, enhance consumer fueling choices at the pump, boost the rural economy, and reduce environmental impacts of those, especially of those of petroleum-based fuels. In all respects, the RFS is well on its way to achieving those goals. In short, the RFS is a policy designed to help fuels like ethanol and biodiesel overcome petroleum's continuing century of subsidies and the federal petroleum mandate, and to leverage greater competition in the marketplace. The goal of the RFS is to ensure consumers can choose the fuel of their choice and not be simply dictated to by large petroleum refiners. When anti-renewable fuel groups attack the RFS, they conveniently forget to mention that the federal energy policy is overwhelmingly tilted in favor of petroleum. Ethanol is cheaper, cleaner, and higher octane than petroleum-based gasoline. Renewable fuels would love to compete on a level playing field, but a level playing field hasn't existed since the century of subsidies for petroleum began in 1913. That's why, during a recent national forum, Representative Steve King noted the RFS, quote, is the only thing that gives market access so that corn and other product-based alternative fuels can get into the tank and be sold in competition with petroleum. If we lose the RFS, then we have a government mandate, a federal mandate for petroleum only in our vehicles. Bills have been introduced in Congress to eliminate the RFS in whole or to cut the RFS in pieces. The renewable fuels community has rallied behind the banner, "Don't mess with the RFS." If elected to the U.S. Senate, Mr. Clovis, would you support maintaining the federal renewable fuel standard with no legislative changes?
Yes. I've come a long way in this, and many of you in the audience have seen the evolution of my thinking on renewable fuels. Many of you know that I'm very outspoken about subsidies. I'm anti-subsidy on everything. I think anytime the government interferes in a market, it causes a distortion of that market. And what it ends up doing is hurting competition, and then by hurting that competition, it hurts the consumer access to the best price and the best product. I think that the RFS as it stands, and first off, I just want to say that the President doesn't pass legislation, the Congress does. RFS 1 was passed by a Republican Congress and then signed by a Republican President. RFS 2 was passed by a Democrat Congress and signed by a Republican President. So those are the things that we have to keep in mind when we start talking about the legislative aspects of this. This is a bipartisan issue. And the RFS allows us access to biofuels that we would not have otherwise. Now, the issue on the table today, and we'll get right to it, is the fact that the RFS is about to be rolled back by the EPA. The EPA is given authority by Congress to do that right now. I think that's something, as an elected senator, that we would have to, I would very much like to see, is to have that if Congress passes the legislation for the RFS, then Congress ought to set the levels for the RFS and not leave that to the EPA. The EPA right now was the driving force behind RFS in the first place, and now they want to take that RFS back. I think that's wrong. And I think for the United States, for a person elected to the Congress of the United States, they ought to be looking for the best possible solution and best possible competition available. And the only way you can do that is to hold the RFS where it is. And I think right now, where we are right now, we're over a barrel, and we need to elevate the rhetoric on this, and I hope that we'll get a chance to do that, because I think that we are really, what we're faced with is ethanol and biofuel producers and farmers are faced right now and are looked at and are marginalized by the media as a special interest, and a greedy special interest at that. Oil on the other side of this has big money. They're able to go out here and fight this battle. So right now it looks like it's that we have a whiny little special interest over here that isn't part of something bigger. And the bigger part of this is that ethanol and all of the other factors associated with our biofuels ought to be part of a national strategy, a national security issue, and have it related to energy policy and agricultural policy need to be linked together. And I think that's where we should be.
Thank you, Mr. Clovis. Mr. Jacobs, if elected to the U.S. Senate, would you support maintaining the federal renewable fuel standard with no legislative changes?
Yes, and I think the lapel pin that Governor Branstad wears says it all when it says don't mess with the RFS. But let me back up and share with you why I support the renewable fuel standard, because I think that's important. The core problem we have in America today is a lack of good jobs. And when Americans are gainfully employed, our families do better, crime rates go down, revenue to the government goes up, and deficits come down. And so the real conversation we need to be having in this country is what is it going to take to get our economy going again? And one of the key things, I think, is to have a sensible, coherent energy policy, which is something that we have just been missing in this country. And we need to be developing our energy sources right here in America, including renewables. And renewables play an incredibly important role in that. When you look at how we've been able to reduce our dependence on foreign oil over the last 10 years as ethanol has come into being, it's been an incredibly important part of the equation. You know, our industry here at Renewables directly employs 2,600 Iowans directly in the renewable fuel industry. And if you take all of the ancillary people that help that industry as well, 60,000 Iowans have a connection to the renewable fuel industry. And I think it's been a tremendous policy that has helped create great jobs in this state, and again, and tackle that critical problem we have in America of not enough jobs in this country. You know, renewable fuel has done a couple other things too. It's helped keep energy prices low. You know, think about this for a minute, that 10% of the supply of our motor fuels come from ethanol. Now, if that didn't happen, that would be replaced by petroleum. And the simple laws of supply-demand economics would dictate that if we increase the demand for petroleum products, the price would go up. So all of us benefit every time we put gas in our car or fuel in our truck. We all benefit from having a sensible policy here for renewables. And as somebody who is going all across this state here and putting about a tank of gas in my car every single day, believe me, I greatly appreciate every time I fill up having the benefit of ethanol choice products at the pump. The fact of the matter is that we don't have a fair playing field today. The oil companies control the distribution channels, and the renewable fuel standards are needed to make sure that we have fair rules and that consumers have choices, and ultimately that's what this is about, making sure that consumers in this country have choices.